Welcome, media friends, to the press conference today. Allow me to introduce the representatives from the THB on the stage. We have the Permanent Secretary for Transport and Housing, Director of Housing, Ms. Agnes Wong. Next to Ms. Agnes Wong, we have Mrs. Alice Chung, Deputy Secretary for Transport and Housing and Deputy Director for Housing Strategy, Mrs. Alice Chung. And also we have Ms. Pak Bin Yong, PAS of THB and Assistant Director for Housing, and also Mrs. Annie Chim, Senior Housing Manager, Special Duties of the Housing Department. Now, Permanent Secretary would give us an opening remark. Good afternoon, media friends. Welcome to the press conference on the launch of the cash allowance trial scheme. Now, as we all know, in her speech, the CE announced in January 2020 that the government would roll out a 3-year cash allowance trial scheme for those who are living in public housing on the waiting list for PRH, not receiving CSSA, however, who are not yet offered the first PRH flagged offer. There would be cash allowance provided for them. The Housing Department is responsible for the scheme. The scheme will be rolled out by the end of June. I'm going to explain the details of the program. However, I would like to highlight a few points first. First of all, the purpose of the scheme is to alleviate the financial burden of grassroots families who are not receiving CSSA and live and are waiting for PRH. I would like to emphasize that the cash allowance is not a rental subsidy. That is, the cash received is not necessarily used on rent, and we don't require a rental receipt and so on as proof. And also, by the end of June, we will send notification for those who will have been waiting for the PRH for more than 3 years by the following month, as well as other eligible general applicant household for PRH. We will also send them the application forms. An estimated 90,000 application forms will be sent. For applicants to receive the subsidy as soon as possible, we have streamlined the vetting and application procedure as soon as possible. On the form, we have pre-printed the information of the applicants, including their application number, as well as the names of the family members of the household. Applicants are only required to fill in simple information, as well as an acknowledgement that they still meet the assets limit for application of PRH, sign the form and then return the form, and then that's it. After receiving the application forms, we will handle them as soon as possible. As I mentioned, by the end of June, we shall send out the 90,000 application forms in one go. So we will have to handle a large batch of applications at the same time. And different cases require different time. In the first batch, we may need 1 to 3 months to handle the applications. Subsequent to that, the processing time required would be shorter. If we cannot handle your application case after the registration date in the following month, we will reimburse the subsidy, the cash allowance for that month to you. For example, if an application is only processed in August, then we would disburse the cash allowance for July and August in one go. The last point I would like to mention is that applicants should be reminded that in filling the forms, they have to provide genuine and accurate information. During the period when they are receiving the cash allowance, if there are any change to the household, for example, addition or reduction of family members of the households, or if their assets amount has exceeded the limits, they should notify the housing department as soon as possible. Anyone who deliberately provide false details to get the cash allowance will be prosecuted. Besides having to, the cash allowance will be clawed back and they will be prosecuted, and upon conviction, they will go to jail. To avoid abuse of the system, we will do random tests among the applicants. Now I will invite Ms. Pak Bin Wong, the PAS, to explain the details for us. Thank you, Permanent Secretary. Before I move on to the details, please refer to a short video clip, about 1 minute long. To alleviate the hardship faced by grassroots families who are waiting for PRH, the government will roll out a 3-year cash allowance trial scheme program for eligible persons. It is under the purview of the housing department. It depends on the level of cash allowance depends on the number of eligible members. For one member household, it is $1,300. For 6 or above, it is $3,900 per month. For those who have been waiting for PRH for 3 years, by June, the housing department will send out application forms and so on. Eligible household will receive the forms, and applicants should fill the forms in as soon as possible and mail the forms to the relevant addresses or mailboxes at relevant housing department offices. If anyone deliberately provide false information or omit information, it is a criminal offense. The trial scheme will last until middle 2024. Please refer to www.cashallowance.gov.hk for details.
嘅推行細節方面咧，
As to the details, the main eligibility criteria are as follows. Number one, one must be the public rental housing general applicant households, i.e. applicant households with 2 or more persons, or applicants under the single elderly persons priority scheme. Number two, they have been waiting for the PRH for more than 3 years and have not yet been provided with the first offer, and eligibility must remain valid. Number three, living in Hong Kong but not living in public housing. And number four, not receiving CSSA. When determining whether someone has been waiting for more than 3 years, we would adopt the mechanism for determining the priority for PRH allocation. The housing department will issue a blue card, a blue acknowledgement card, where we have the G number equivalent date. If there are any changes to the application, then there would be a registration date attached, and we adopt this G number equivalent date as the basis. In absence of any G number date, we would stick with the registration date. And in this scheme, we would also adopt this mechanism to determine whether an applicant has been waiting for more than 3 years. As I said, the eligibility must remain valid before the CATS can be applied for. They have to be meeting the income and asset limits. They should not own any domestic property in Hong Kong. They must meet the residence requirement. They should not hold a valid green form certificate, and also the PRH application is not being frozen or withheld. One of the eligibility criteria is not living in public housing. By this we mean the tenants or authorized occupants of rental units provided by the HA or the Housing Society, or those living in interim housing provided by the HA, and they are not eligible for the cash allowance. This scheme will run for 3 years till mid-2024. The Housing Department will issue notification letters towards the end of each month to PRH GA households will have been waiting for PRH for more than 3 years, but have not yet received the first offer. Those who may also meet other eligibility criteria will receive an application form and also application guide. After issuing the application form, the Housing Department will send an SMS to notify the applicant. Some households will only receive the notification letter but not the application form. HD or they may not fulfill all the fundamental criteria, or they may not hold they may hold the green form certificate, or in some cases their applications may have been frozen or withheld. And all the reasons will be stated in the application form. If there are any changes subsequently and the applicant fulfills the criteria, the Housing Department will issue the application form to them. In the application form, it contains the pre-printed information of the household, and it should not be transferred to any other persons. And households should also read the application guide before completing the application form. They should understand all the requirements and the arrangement before filling out the application form. Unless they need to amend the family particulars, all they need to do is to fill out the ID numbers of the family members and also the bank account information, and also read and sign the declaration to indicate acknowledgement to make sure that they fall within the income asset limit. And then they need to submit the form together with a copy of the passport page, a monthly statement of the bank account, and all family members above the age of 18 will have to sign the declaration. To facilitate form filling, we have produced demonstration video for the steps of completing and submitting the application form, which will be posted on the web. If the application forms are mailed to the HD, sufficient postage will have to be provided, and we will not receive any application form without sufficient postage. The HD will acknowledge receipt of the application form by SMS within a month. After vetting, the HD will issue a notification of application result. Successful applicant households will receive the cash allowance on a monthly basis via bank transfer. We have taken into account the level of half of the current CSSA maximum rental allowance in February this year. And the allowance will be determined by the number of eligible members within the PRH application concerned, ranging from 1,300 for 1P household to 3,900 for 6P household and above. If certain family members are not eligible, like they're living in public housing, they are not eligible. Other members, however, meeting all the criteria, will be able to apply, and the level of cash allowance will be determined by the size of the household. In terms of start month of the cash allowance, this is determined by the date on which the household meets all the eligibility criteria, or the submission date of the completed application form, whichever is later. And the earliest start date is the 1st of July 2021. So PRH GA households meeting the criteria should complete and submit the forms as soon as possible. In the course of receiving the allowance, if there are any changes to the family circumstances, the household must update the Housing Department and notify the Application Subsection and Cash Allowance Office. And all the details are sent out in the application guide. We have created a designated website which contains all the information, like the introduction videos, key highlights of the CATS, FAQs, information for the ethnic minorities, and so on. The application guide and the information update can also be downloaded from the web. This will be activated by this afternoon. Thank you. Thanks very much, PAS. And I'll throw the floor open for questions. Please identify yourself before putting questions, please. Lady over there.
THK English News. First question, can you tell the public kind of when is the fastest date they can receive this cash allowance and get it in their account? And for them to qualify for this fastest date, when is the latest they will have to submit the form to authorities? Second question, because we're looking at around $3,900 at most for these households who apply, and the amount is not a lot. So how much is that going to help? Do you think it can help much given the expensive rent in Hong Kong? Third question, do authorities have any plans so far to include the thousands of single applicants who are not elderly applicants to be also included in this scheme? Those are my questions. Thank you.
First of all, we aim to send out around 90,000 application forms to the eligible applicants by the end of this month. So we urge them to complete the form and return it to us as soon as possible. So it depends on when they give it back to us. So our estimate is that if they send it back to us at the earliest time, so we aim at dishing out the allowance in early July, if possible. But all it depends on when they can send it back to us. So talking about in July, that will be the earliest batch of applicants who will receive the allowance. And as to how much it can help, as I've already said at the beginning, this is not a rent subsidy. So whenever they receive this cash allowance, there's no need for us definitely to use it to pay for rent per se. So this is purely to relieve their pressure while waiting for the public rental housing. So, I don't know how much it will help, but it definitely will provide some kind of relief to them, and this is also the main objective of the cash allowance. As to your last question about the single applicant, I think you are talking about applicant under the quota and point system. The design of this cash allowance, because the target to offer a flat offer to PRH applicant, we always said that this is for the family applicant and also the elderly one-person applicant. So this 3-year target from day one is not applicable to QPS applicant. So the design of the cash allowance is mirroring the criteria for the PRH application as well. So this is like a trial scheme, and we can see how it goes, and then, depends on the situation.
The lady over here. The lady in black. Good afternoon, I'm from Hong Kong 01. The first question, the cash allowance has ruled out singletons who are not elderly people. If they are still waiting for PRH, then they are still suffering from inadequate housing. So why are they ruled out from this scheme? Why are they not benefited? Second question, you have emphasized many times that the cash allowance received may not be spent, may not necessarily be spent on rent. However, are you worried that there will be landlords who make use of the opportunity to raise the rent? Third question, the level of cash allowance is rather low. Some households said that the level of cash allowance is not sufficient to pay half of their rent. So how will it serve to alleviate their situation? Concerning the level of cash allowance, we have made reference to the CSSA. we don't want to create a new mechanism. We are making reference to the current CSSA maximum rental allowance, which is half of it. Whether it is enough, we are trying to provide alleviation rather than a rental allowance for the household to pay rent. That's why we consider the level of cash allowance for this trial scheme suitable. Concerning tenancy control for subdivided flats, as you know, we are working at full steam to work out the tenancy control legislation. Our target is to submit the proposal to LegCo by the end of this term, and hopefully it will be passed within this legislative term. So we are working simultaneously. On why we do not include non-elderly singleton applicants, well, the design of the scheme is targeted at household applicants as well as singleton elderly people. That's why they are not, the singleton non-elderly people are not included in this scheme. And my colleague has reminded me the allowance will be transferred at the end of the month via bank transfer. So as the earliest, it will be dispersed by the end of July. So as the earliest, applicants can receive the allowance by the end of July. The gentleman over there, I'm from One Way Pao. So how much does the scheme cost? And some clarification, the 90,000 forms sent out, do you mean that those are households who already have waited for 3 years? What about those who have been waiting more than 3 years for PRH? So for those who have been waiting for PRH for more than 3 years without being offered the first PRH by the end of July, they will be given a form. There are people who have been waiting for more than 3 years. So at the end of each month, we would send out notifications and forms to those who are going to have waited for 3 years at the subsequent month, and so on. Sorry, the speaker is not speaking through the mic. 90,000 forms for those who have waited for more than 3 years by the end of July. So they may have waited for 3 or 4 or 5 years. A lot of forms are being sent out because we want to include all those who have been waiting for 3 years or more. Sorry, the speaker is not using the microphone. So do you mean that very date? Ms. Wong, would you please speak into the microphone? Your voice is not clear enough. Much better. The cash allowance would be given to the applicants until the first PRH is offered. So the timing of disbursements of cash allowance would be different, would vary. Anyway, it would the cash allowance would stop when the first PRH flag is offered to the applicants. For year 2021 to 22, we have set aside $1.5 billion on the cash allowance trial scheme. This is the estimation. Good morning. I am from Independent Media. What about the tenants of the 4 industrial buildings who are being moved out by the housing society? They said they would not want to move. Will the director meet with these tenants, and how are you going to address their call for not demolishing the industrial housings and move them? It seems that you are ignoring the demand for those tenants. This is not the topic of today's press conference. I will make a brief reply concerning redevelopments of IBs in these industrial buildings. We have ex gratia allowance for them. it is not so much as a compensation because it is a landlord-tenant relationship. In theory, landlord can evict the tenants after giving notice. However, we have provided ex gratia payments for them. We have made it very clear to the tenants. For each industrial building, we have colleagues meeting with the tenants inside. That's why we are clear about the situation and we do care about them. We have, for some tenants, we would give them a 15 months ex gratia allowance. And also for other tenants, there will be other allowances and early bird allowances as well. But will you meet with them in person because they don't want to be evicted? They don't want any compensation package. Well, this press conference is on the launch of the cash allowance trial scheme, so please focus on the scheme. Next, please. The one in blue. Good afternoon, I'm from TVB. Will the cash allowance be considered a part of income and affect the assets affecting the assets level of the applicants? Now, 90,000 people will be benefited. So do you foresee that more and more will be qualified and more money will be spent on the scheme? And do you think that it is too late to do a review 3 years later? The cash allowance disbursed will not be counted towards income in terms of eligibility for PRH. So if the assets or if the cash allowance is kept in bank without being used, then they would be counted towards assets after 2 years only. I forgot your second question. Yes, the 3 years, the 3-year review. So the trial scheme is 3 year long, and then we will carry out a review. It is a trial scheme. That's why there will be a holistic review in terms of the policy aspects and the implementation details of the scheme. Like I mentioned, the time of disbursements for each applicant may vary. Cash allowance would be disbursed until the first PRH is offered. So for some who have been waiting for a rather long time, they would get the first PRH sooner, and then the cash allowance would stop. And there are some new applicants on the list. So the situation is still fluid. Now, this amount has been set aside for the scheme, and then we will keep monitoring.
But the waiting list is getting longer. Do you foresee a bigger and bigger amount? This is only a trial scheme which will be running for 3 years. As to how this will be taken forward, and this will be considered in a review exercise. The one in black, please.
Critics argue that with no tenancy control in place in subdivided units, the subsidies would be going straight into the pockets of landlords. So I understand that this cash allowance is not a rental subsidy, but what ways do officials have to prevent landlords from taking advantage of this and raising rents or overcharging for utilities? And my next question is, what factors will the government consider when deciding whether to continue with the trial scheme when it's reviewed 3 years from now? Thank you.
I think the rental control for SDU, we are now at the almost final stage of preparing the bill for introducing this rental control for SDUs. And our target is to introduce the bill within this legislative session and hopefully to be enacted within this legislative session. So there are mechanisms in place for rental control for SDU. And for this one, well, honestly, because this cash allowance, the whole objective is to provide some relief measures to those who are in need. So, well, of course, for us, for PRH application, we will not count that as their income. So that will not affect the PRH application. But for the private landlords, well, we hope that this is something the government cannot honestly control them, not to increase rent per se, but since we have the SDU rent control in place, hopefully this will also balance off the potential impact.
And what about the review? What criteria?
During the review, we will look at the policy objectives of this cash allowance trial scheme, as well as all the operational issues. So the scheme will aim at launch it within this month. So this is a bit early to say exactly what will be the review result at this point.
Okay, 好，以為
RTHK. Permanent Secretary, you mentioned 1,300 for 1P household and 3,900 for 6P household. You think that this is an appropriate level? Do you think that this is really heartless? $1,300 is really not much of anything in Hong Kong. Do you think that what makes you think that this level of cash allowance would be enough to help those who are caught in poverty? Now, some people spend this amount of money just in one meal. Now, 3,900 for 6P household, do you think this is enough? Also, you're here to help those who are on the waiting list for more than 3 years. And indeed, there are many who have been waiting for less than 3 years, and they are really seriously affected by the exorbitant rent. Do you have any other measures that the government is reviewing to help these people as well? You said that this is not a kind of rental allowance. When the landlords are aware of this particular scheme, they will check up the rents. Do you think that this is fattening up the landlord instead of helping the tenants? Wouldn't it be a better course of action for you to expedite the rental control? Well, I understand that whatever the level is, some may think that this is not sufficient. Now, we are taking into account half of the CSSA maximum rental allowance. Now, these are not CSSA recipients, and we are taking the CSSA rental allowance as the reference point. Now, it is 1,300 for 1P household and 3,900 for 6P household and above. So we are here to provide some relief to the households. We may not be able to meet all the needs, but this is only a way of relief. Indeed, the government does have other schemes. They may not come under the housing department. We also have the WFA, the Working Family Allowance, and also the Community Care Fund and so on. Now, this is a brand new cash allowance trial scheme, and we hope to provide some relief. We may not be able to meet all the needs of the households, that's for sure. As to whether the landlords will put up the rents, as I said, in the meantime, we are getting on with the rental control of the subdivided units, so we hope that taken together, we will be able to offer some help. Hong Kong is, after all, a free society. We will do where we can do. For those who have been waiting for less than 3 years, do you have any other means, any other schemes? We don't for the time being. In this exercise, now for the rental housing, it is our objective that for the households to get the allocation within 3 years. It is on this basis that we launch this cash allowance trial scheme. Director, I'm from the Economic Times. Now, you said that this scheme is intended to offer some relief to the grassroots households who have been waiting for rental housing for more than 3 years. Are you, in effect, admitting that the 3-year allocation is a failure and you're offering some relief to them? There are some news that in terms of allocation, you're falling behind again. That this time lag, will this aggravate this child scheme, and this will become a bottomless pit, and you are trying to offer them some hush money to keep them quiet about the long waiting time. Well, the 3-year allocation remains our objective. Go back in time. Back in 1998, the Housing Authority decided on this 3-year waiting time. It was 6.6 years at the time that we have the target. It is only with the target that we know what we're supposed to do in terms of supply. Today, we understand that the supply is lagging a little bit behind, but we are going to increase the supply to meet the demand. So this is not a kind of compensation. Now, for people who have been waiting for PRH for more than 3 years, we understand that they may experience some difficulties in life, and this is an extra kind of relief, and this is the overriding objective of the scheme. In general, the lag in allocation is attributed to many factors, like construction factor or weather factor, and some people may not be able to get the allocation within the scheduled time. But we will make up for the lost time, and we will expedite the allocation time where circumstances permit. Last 2 questions. The gentleman in white, AM730. I'd like to put a technical question. Now, this amount of money is intended for those who have been waiting for more than 3 years without the first offer. Now, some people would decline the first offer. How do you actually count the first offer? Is it the offer that they accept, or do you count the time that they get allocated a flat when you stop the allowance? Now, this scheme is intended to help the applicant who have been waiting for more than 3 years. And for the QPS applicants, they are also in need, and they need rental housing. Why is it that they are denied the opportunities? Because it is difficult to work out the points. Why is it so difficult to incorporate these non-elderly singletons into this particular scheme? Is it because it is difficult to work out the points, or is it difficult to work out the waiting time, and it's difficult for you to draw a line and incorporate them into the scheme?
The disbursements of cash allowance would be up to the first PRH flat offer. As you know, every PRH applicant can have a maximum of 3 offers. The disbursements of cash allowance is only up to the first one. The reason is that when the first PRH flat is offered, if it is accepted, the applicant can get the flat. However, we respect the applicant's decision if he chooses not to accept it. However, for fair distribution of public money, we consider that the cash allowance would be disbursed up to the first PRH flat offer, whether he accepts it or not. Now, the scheme would follow the mechanism for PRH application. So according to the Housing Department's mechanism, we would disperse allowance to those who have been on the waiting list for 3 or more years. We have not included the singleton non-elderly households. This is based on the point system. So the purpose of the cash allowance trial scheme is for household applicants and singleton elderly households. The last question. Hi, I'm from Oriental Daily. About the level of cash allowance. You said the cost is $8 billion. However, just now the director said for this year you're going to take out $1.5 billion. So are you going to approach LegCo for more funding? Do you think you will have to inject more funding into the scheme? And concerning the reimbursements of the allowance for the month during application, how is that? And also concern on bank transfer by the end of the month. Let's say if an applicant apply immediately after receiving the forms by the end of June, then will they be able to receive the cash allowance by the end of July as the earliest? I will invite my colleague to answer your last question. And yes, you have a clear mind. I just wanted to focus on the cost for year 2021 to 22. For the trial scheme, the LegCo has approved a non-concurrent commitment of $8.1 billion. That's the total amount for the entire scheme. For this year, 2021 to 22, we estimate that we only need $1.5 billion for the scheme. On the reimbursements of allowance, by the end of June, 90,000 forms will be sent out to the applicants. Now, if all the applicants fill in the form in one go, then we will have to handle a lot of forms. We cannot wait until we have processed every application. We will disperse the amount once we have processed certain cases. So for some households, they may have submitted the forms in July already. However, we may not be able to process the forms until August. Then, by the end of August, when we disperse the cash allowance, we will also disperse the cash allowance for July as well. It means that the household would not be losing out on 1 month's allowance because of our processing. So the question has been answered. Does it mean that at the earliest, cash allowance can be received by the end of July? Yes, for the earliest case, it may be by the end of July because the bank transfer will be made by the end of each month. So this is the end of today's press conference. Thank you very much.
做乜即個 poster 嘅喎？頭先你未影到啊？